I wanted to know, in terms of concessionary financing, there was previously, like about 2 years ago, in terms of migration, UNHCR took a lead in getting the World Bank to change its rules so that middle-income countries like Jordan, for example, could in fact receive financing. So I wanted to know whether UNDP, UNEP, some combination can make the same kind of lobbying to have that happen. And then I had one, and my Antigua Barbuda question is slightly different. It has to do with the John Ashe case, and I'll keep it very brief. I wanted to know if you can give a brief update of what the status of the government addressing the issues that came out during that case and in your predecessor. And even for UNDP, we've been asking for some time for the Office of South-South Cooperation to come and just give a briefing on what it learned from the case and how it's operating. Maybe you can say a few words about that. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. So I'll take on the issue with John Ashe. Well, again, we're not too sure exactly what is happening with that case. The last thing we heard is that NGM Lapsing was actually convicted. I understand that he's appealing. As you know, John Ashe passed, but he had maintained his innocence. Unfortunately, he's not alive to stand trial, and I'm not sure that I'm in a position to say anything further on that issue.
Well, very briefly on the issue of finance, I think the Secretary General during his recent visit in the wake of the hurricane damage made it very clear that he does view and give priority to the issue of finance and the challenges of finance faced by Caribbean and other small island states, and indeed a number of middle-income countries that need to be looked at through a more differentiated lens. Certainly we in UNDP have been working and are working with the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General and some of our colleagues in the World Bank also. I attended the Small States Forum, also at the World Bank IMF annual meeting, advocating that, we cannot close our eyes to this reality that you described very vividly, Prime Minister. And I think there are solutions. The worry at the moment is, if you change something, do you create a precedent for everything else? This is usually, the most defensive of arguments one can use when there is evidence that there is a real need here to approach this issue differently. And I certainly look forward to working with Antonio Guterres and Amina Mohammed and other colleagues, including in the World Bank and the IMF, and also the IDB and ECLAC, our Regional Economic Commission, on understanding what are some of the lessons that we have learned and how can we influence the thinking in moving forward. On the issue that you raised related to John Ashe, I can only say these are events that happened before I assumed my tenure here. We, and I have certainly been briefed on a number of internal processes that have examined very carefully the chronology of events, the lessons that have been learned. Well before my arrival, consequences were taken, and this relates now to internal UN processes. But let me also echo the Prime Minister's statement. As somebody who has passed away, all I can say is to his family and to him, may his soul rest in peace. We cannot judge on someone who has passed and cannot defend himself in the courts today. And for that reason, I refrain from making any further comments on him. Thank you.
Sure. Office of South-South Cooperation, I'd have, rest in peace. It goes without saying.
And if I may just follow on the issue of Jordan, we have made a similar request for there to be a carve-out for small island Caribbean states, and specifically referring to the smaller countries in the OECS. I mean, they're like microstates with populations under 100,000 individuals. The very size of these islands make them vulnerable. And clearly, we have the view that the international community ought to look at the vulnerability of these countries in order to determine eligibility. Now, in the case of Antigua, we have had to accommodate about 3,000 climate refugees from Dominica. That is not unlike Jordan in terms of scale. I mean, 3,000 individuals, that's about 3% of our total population size. We also had 1,800 Barbudans who came over to Antigua. They are internally displaced persons. That's another 2%. So overnight, our population would have increased by about 5%. So the argument, you can see the parallel. And we have the view that just as how this carve-out was done for Jordan and other countries, that a similar carve-out could be achieved for Antigua and Barbuda and other countries within the OECS.